Pianist George Colligan is an extremely versatile musician. He's really worked with some of the who's who in jazz, including Buster Williams, Lenny White, Christian McBride, Michael Brecker. The names go on, but he's worked with some real top names. George Colligan calls Portland, Oregon home, and he's an accomplished professor at Portland State. And we did this at Portland State, and he's got an office there and really established there in Portland. When we talk about Portland and the Portland scene and the pluses and minuses to being in Portland. George Colligan is really quite a talented guy. He can play many instruments and play them well enough to make you believe that that was his main instrument. He actually went to school for trumpet, I believe classical trumpet, but his main instrument in jazz is piano, but he also plays organ and he plays drums. He's just a very talented guy, and he's very sought after. I believe he has at least 24 or 25 records as a leader and over 100 records as a sideman that he's been on. So he's really somebody who's played, he's not quite 50 yet, but really has played on quite a lot. So I think he has some great stuff to say. Thanks for checking out this interview. At the end of the interview, I have a little bit of him playing. I really hope you check it out. And yeah, consider, if you like the West Coast, consider going out to Portland State if you're a young player who wants to play jazz but also wants to have a little bit of that West Coast area. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm here with the great pianist George Colligan, and so we're here in Portland, Oregon. We're getting a view of the jazz scene here in the Pacific Northwest. And so George, we're here at the school that you are teaching at, Portland State.
Yes, Portland State University.
Great. So you're a professor here, and are you like the head of the program, or?
I'm not actually the head, although I do have certain responsibilities. The duties that might, in some places, just fall under, say, a director, are sort of split between three faculty members: myself, my colleague Daryl Grant, and another colleague who's our vocal professor named Sherry Alves. So the three of us, we divide up a lot of our duties. But in some ways, any of us can act as though we're the director. None of us is really considered officially a director because of just the way the financial model is structured at the school. It might change at some point, but basically we all try to reach a consensus. It's been the past few years have been different because I was on sabbatical for a year, and then Daryl went on a sabbatical. So for that time, it was just two faculty members. So this next year will be three of us working together to reach a consensus on what's best for the program, and it's been a learning experience. I don't consider myself an academic, even though I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. But my view of my opinions and priorities about jazz music and what I think is important, I mean, in a way, come from the streets, if you will. It's like I did a degree in classical trumpet and music ed, but I got my jazz information from guys in Baltimore and guys in Washington, D.C., and from recordings, and just from not even necessarily lessons, but just asking people on the gig, like, what was that chord, or who do you listen to, or like, how should I approach this, like just kind of bits and pieces here and there. And then I was lucky to, as a jazz pianist, a very rudimentary jazz pianist, to luck into a 2-night-a-week gig at a hotel in Baltimore. the Hyatt Regency. And that's essentially how I learned from two older guys that were in the band. We just read tunes, and they just like kicked my butt. And
that's really great. I mean you're about about 50 years old, right? So
not quite.
Close to 50.
Don't rush me. Getting there.
Yeah, that you're kind of like one of the last generation who was able to really do that on the bandstand with some of these originators. I mean,
well, and yes, I'm from you could argue that I'm from that last generation that got to do some of that. It's invaluable playing with older cats. That's really what it's all about. But unfortunately, now that everything is shifted into education, it is a very different dynamic. And there's really even in how I approach playing and my feeling about what is playing music about, what is playing jazz all about, is so different now from, say, the 90s. Mm-hmm. The 90s, you could do long tours and you could do many, many gigs with a band, and that's how you developed. Like, it wasn't the idea of just do one gig and then don't play for 6 months. You played all the time, and you played multiple nights with the same people. Some of the tours I did were 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 11 weeks. I mean, you get your skills up playing every night for 11 weeks. I mean, it's and you can't do that just playing in a class.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the major things I've been trying to talk to guys about, and how we move forward in the music world. Because I've been talking with someone like Alex Lane, this older guy who he's working 7 nights a week, multiple times a day, and now the whole scene is completely different for a variety of factors. I mean, you have just television and the advent of television and Netflix now and the internet. People are just doing that and staying home. They're not going out to gigs.
For a multitude of reasons, people stay home, and that's part of the lack of interest in live music in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. That definitely has an effect, you know what I mean? But, the thing is, this music, in terms of like what makes somebody become a musician. And some people like music, you know what I mean? Well, most people kind of like music, but like whether that should be your lifelong pursuit, and to what extent should that be your pursuit? Like, some people like music enough to, say, listen to music, and they buy records, or they listen to a lot of Spotify or whatever they do, and they go to concerts every now and then. And then some people, they learn an instrument and they practice and they get to a decent level, and maybe they might even do some professional performances. But like, to me, the level that I aspire to, and I think that the greats, when we look at the greats, it's almost like an obsession. It's like an unhealthy obsession, clearly, because people have sacrificed. You make sacrifices, as in like, oh, I'll live in a city that I don't necessarily want to live in to play music, and I'll get on an airplane. I don't like flying, but I know that I can't play music on a certain level if I don't do things that be around people that I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know these people.
Yep.
Some of these older cats, they're from a different generation. That things that they are interested in, I don't even understand. But I want to play music, and I'll hang with these people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's really great, and especially in your career. I mean, you've been on over 100 recordings as a sideman with some of these real greats. I mean, I've been following you. Sometimes you come to New York and you're playing with Buster Williams and Lenny White, and that's just really great. You played with some of those originators, and now you're here in Portland, and teaching.
Well, what's interesting is that even a lot of the great legendary cats are looking to teaching. Buster teaches, Lenny teaches. Steve Wilson, who's in Buster's band, he teaches.
Yeah.
Stefan Harris plays with the band sometimes. He's got all these guys have major positions. They're teaching a lot, So all of us are kind of looking to teaching as a way to have some kind of stability, especially as we get older, And traveling isn't really what it was, and it's not as lucrative. That being said, I think I'm not 100. Let me say this: that I don't want to necessarily say that the idea of jazz in academia is not good. I think that in some ways it deserves a place in academia because it is important culturally. It's complex music, and it deserves real study and real direction and coaching. In a way, like that's what's cool about some of the musicians coming up afterwards, is that they get both things. They can study with a master in a proper setting, and then also get a lot of the nuts and bolts, like get sort of the complete package if there's a good curriculum. You know what I mean? So you got a lot of guys that like they have the street smarts, but they also have a lot of technique. You know what I mean? And they can do anything. So that's actually good for the music in a way, and I think also in terms of being appreciated from an intellectual standpoint. That's one of the things that I think is a problem with American jazz, is that it's in this weird middle area where it's not, when you say, oh, that's a music that you play in a club, like some classical musicians will say, oh, this is the music of, the bars and stuff. It's not really like if you play in a bar, that's not considered serious. Mm-hmm. But, a lot of these clubs are essentially bars. Yeah. But some of the greatest music ever has been, live at the Plug Nickel. What is the Plug Nickel? Is that Carnegie Hall? No. But amazing music was made there. So that's the paradox. And then is it for some people who go to a bar to listen to music, to them jazz is too intellectual. That should be in a concert hall. That should be in a school for eggheads. You know what I'm saying? So I think that for people who know, obviously I think it's, in a way, it's good that it has both of those qualities, which makes it such a compelling music, if one will give it the chance. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You touch on a lot of good points there. Especially with classical music, there's like an element of racism in it. The amount of money that's allocated towards classical music. I think jazz is 0.1% of the funding, even.
Right.
And then, as far as in the clubs, playing in the clubs, we're having issues. Ever since the advent of the real electric sound that came in the 80s with, synthesizers and things, people started being able to just maybe blast the music on the speakers instead of having live music.
Right. It's always interesting to me, you could play in a place, and it's even a place that they know you're playing jazz.
Yeah.
And they never seem to play stuff over the loudspeaker that that goes with what you're playing. They play some kind of.
We had a bartender. As soon as the music was done in the break, she would play like Taylor Swift or some completely different thing from the music that was there in the venue. But
I find that very annoying, but what can you do?
But we're also dealing with the issue of early education, kindergarten, first grade. These music programs that were around for guys like you and I are not there anymore.
Sure.
There's no one playing
cutting
on the
music.
piano. Things. So people don't know what the good music sounds like, and then they're just listening to Spotify, and they're listening to these mumble rap and what.
Right.
And you look at a video on YouTube, one video that goes on YouTube, and in 1 week it has 80 million views, which is more than all the jazz on YouTube.
I know, it's really mystifying. I was just saying to this vocalist Jared Lawson, who's actually, I was surprised to find he's not much younger than I am, and we were saying that like we look at today's music, and unfortunately, I guess you get to a certain age and you start to be mystified by what the younger generation is checking out,
Yeah.
But I think it's even more extreme now because it's just in terms of like, it's hard to even call it music at times.
Yeah, I mean it's basically just a beat and someone speaking over it. That's
right. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I liked when it was still called rap in the 80s, and there was a lot of hip hop in the 90s that I really got into. I loved Wu-Tang Clan. I loved Biggie Smalls and all that stuff. But now it seems like it's kind of become so oversimplified, and from a message standpoint too, is because you could, things like Public Enemy at least had a political stance that was really intriguing at the time.
Something they were saying.
They had a message. I mean, Grandmaster Flash had a song called "The Message," and that was what it was. It was about talking about realities, and now it's sort of just like.
Money, fast cars, women.
Yeah, it's very shallow.
Yeah.
And I believe all music has the right to exist, but it just I can't hide my disappointment at the fact that it seems like the industry is going in this way that seems to be only this very kind of like songs of dubious nature.
Oh yeah, and then. We have other issues within our own jazz scene. I mean, you want to talk about jazz at Lincoln Center, for example. I mean,
sure.
That place was built hundreds of millions of dollars, at least $200 million to build that.
Absolutely.
And they have Mr. Marsalis, Winter Marsalis, at the head of it, who's getting paid $1 million a year. And has
nice
a very
work.
conservative, but he has a very conservative view of what should be in those places and what's played there. So I just wish, for the younger generation. I mean, anytime I've been there, I run into like people who are in their 50s and 60s. I don't see any young people there because they can't afford it.
That is a big. You've definitely brought up a good point, and Wynton Marsalis, I have a lot of appreciation for him because it's possible that maybe I would not have, he got very famous in the 80s, early 80s, when I was starting to get into trumpet and getting into listening to music.
Yeah.
So I would have to credit him as being an influence.
Same thing for me. I mean, he was the guy that was playing with
I think a lot of people
music, All Rise and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that, and I use the Ken Burns jazz videos as a teaching tool. I think it's really valuable. I do think it does take a bit of a turn towards propaganda at a certain point, by sort of, and Wynton, as much respect for him as I have as a musician, he's not necessarily a historian.
Yeah.
So having him be the loudest voice is maybe a mistake, you know what I mean? It's sort of be like having, like Ken Burns did. I mean, and Ken Burns should know better.
Yeah.
But Ken Burns admitted that he didn't know a lot about jazz, so he went to the most popular person at the time. Yeah. It'd be kind of like if he was doing, his Civil War documentary, and all his documentaries are great, but it's like if he talked to like Matthew Broderick, who was in that movie, you know what I mean? Like it wouldn't make it. He's not a historian. He was in a movie about it. So like you don't talk to him, you talk to somebody else. So that type of thinking, I just think, and that's why I don't want to necessarily become conservative in that way. Like any music, I will at least give it a chance. I mean, and Drake can laugh his way to the bank. He'll never see this video.
Yeah.
My students were like, "You got to check out Drake. You got to check out Drake. But you got to check out Kanye. You got to check out Kanye." And I've tried, and I've spent, minutes, precious moments, trying to figure out what makes this music so interesting to people, and it just doesn't appeal to me. So that being said, who knows? Maybe the next time I listen to it, I'll change my mind. But like I said, I think all music has the right to exist. It's just a shame that commercially, some things that I find very, not impressive become, these people become millionaires, and then other people like McCoy Tyner are underappreciated.
Mulgrew wasn't struggling financially, but I wish, Mulgrew Miller was...
Well, he was teaching.
Yeah, he was teaching at William Patterson, and man, we'd be sitting there and his ensembles we just suck it up, and all the stuff he would be playing.
Mulgrew Miller was, really amazing pianist, amazing comper, and also, could speak about the music. I didn't spend much time with him, but anytime I was around him, he had a lot of great stories. And also, you can see videos of him when he was teaching, and they're very wise and insightful. And he was definitely one of the grand masters. Definitely died too young, but just a plethora of information.
For sure. That was the big thing for us at William Patterson. We were really fortunate. I was fortunate to get to an interview with him right before a year before he passed, and he had this vision and this positivity about the future of jazz. You guys are the future generations. He'd always be encouraging us to continue bringing on, but also let us know what we had to work on and bring to the shows. Going back to talking about music programs, I think I recently put a video. It's just, should he go to music school in 2019 in New York?
Right.
You're talking about Manhattan School of Music, $300,000 for 4 years, and New School is close behind, Juilliard. They're all in that range, and you buy a house and live a nice life for that kind of money.
That's exactly what I've been saying. I found out recently that my alma mater, Peabody Conservatory, now costs, with room and board, $280,000. For 4 years,
just
for a jazz degree or a performance degree. And I have so many former, alum like myself, classmates that don't play. They're not using that degree to perform. $280,000. You can buy a house in Baltimore, a nice house, for $90,000, maybe less. You know what I mean? So as an investment, you know what I mean? And so this has been an argument for a long time, and now Portland State is much more affordable, but even so, I talk to my students, and they tell me about, I work 2-3 jobs, to pay student loans and to pay off debt and to just afford to live. Like, that's a big crisis happening in America in general. I often say, because people are like, well, what should I do? Should I go to New York? And there's no right answer for everybody. It's like, you do whatever you think is right for you, but getting a degree in jazz is not right for everybody. You know what I mean? And some people get a degree in jazz, and then they don't really know how to play. You know what I mean? You could learn how to play without a degree. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a problem, even though that is in a way against my interest as a professor. I'm supposed to be recruiting, and I do recruit when I can, but I also say, well, I'm not here to force anybody or say this is the only path.
Well, it absolutely is. And rightfully so. As a musician, you have a right to make a living. You have a family, young family, and I have the same thing. That's important, and I've found that now many of the musicians, they are relying on these school programs to teach and make money in that way. I guess now looking at it, I feel like there'll need to be a balance eventually, because I've been talking with people 10, 20 years from now, we might not have any of these programs.
That is a worry. I sort of wonder, because like with us, for example, our numbers fluctuate, and some of it has to do with who from the community wants to come here, who from other states want to come here. Like we had one dean who left, who was talking about the future of this program for music is out of state.
Yeah.
You know, so the question is, how do we get people who they have so many other options to think of Portland as a destination for jazz, you know, and that's been harder to sell. The scene here, I think this was maybe your initial thought, is like the Portland jazz scene has definitely had its ups and downs since I've been here. When I first got here, I was very excited because I was like, oh, there's a lot of places to play and it's easy to get around and it's not as hectic as New York and seems like a lot of cool people, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of those venues sort of, and there was even some new venues opening up, which I thought was cool. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of places closed or stopped having music. And it was like, just within maybe 6 months to a year, there was this big hole in the scene. And I don't think we've ever totally recovered from that. There are a few places to play. It's competitive. It's also gotten more crowded in Portland just from a traffic standpoint and a living standpoint, because everybody was like, oh, I'm going to move to Portland, you know.
Yeah.
So that's made it harder to get around, and I think that affects whether people go to, like, some people just don't want to leave their house because they just don't want to sit in traffic, you know, or they don't want to take public transportation or whatever. So I think the Portland scene right now is a little bit like it's uncertain. Like, I think it's hanging on, and I think there is a vibrancy that's probably better than some places, you know. I mean, I know a lot of people that don't live in New York complain about the scene, you know.
Yeah, it's hardly, I mean, where I was, you know, we had a jazz festival in that town, and the guy Andy Jaffe, when he was on sabbatical, they pulled the funding, you know. What you'll see this happen with certain things, like the shifty stuff that happens. Unfortunately, in this modern day of economics, I mean, we had the Great Recession coming out of 2008, and what I've just seen is it's just so it's hard for a lot of these clubs. And in New York, we had a club that was only around for about 6 months. It was a Moldy Fig, and the guy had built it up, and it was a really nice venue. And I think he had some economic issues and an issue with a woman upstairs or something.
Okay.
But I hope in the future for the young guys of my generation or people coming out of schools need to, you know, hang with guys like Spike Wilner and that generation who know how to run clubs, because it's going to be up to the young players to continue to open venues and continue to support the music, because otherwise, you know, 30, 40 years from now, when all the originators have passed, I mean, I don't see the future in
but
in
you know,
the US.
the thing is, and it's hard to see, it's hard to have a historical perspective when you're right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it's going to take another form. I mean, to me, I just think that, you know, whether it's jazz or not is not important to me. I just want people to be making music for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And look, you know, if people want to make money, like, it's almost like the commercial part of the business and the musical part are starting to split off.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit worrisome as an artist. I think at heart I'm an artist. So I think that musicians should be making, and composers and whatever, should be making music that they really believe in, rather than like this sort of cynical, I'm going to sell 1 million copies. I mean, if you sell the music, it's great, but like, I also don't think you need to necessarily sell 1 million copies or get 1 million hits or whatever to have some kind of success. So it's all, and this sort of relates to, why would anybody major in music or become a musician if you can't make a living, or you're going to go into debt or whatever? And the point is to think about life in terms of what's the most important thing to you. So to me, like I said, it's a bit of an unhealthy obsession, but is being creative and being a part of the music. This is why historically a lot of musicians aren't good at money, because it's like an addiction. It really is like,
it's a passion.
They have to play music, you know, and it's like, why don't you sit down and figure out your finances. And it's like, but I need to learn this solo, or I need to work on this lick in 12 keys, or I need to like go down and hang with the cats, you know. So that's I think that sort of thing will actually keep the music alive. You know what I mean? It's because people will do it regardless. I mean, people have been complaining about how much like local gigs pay ever since I've been doing it. You know what I mean? It's like the pay has not gone up, but people still play because they want to play.
Yeah.
So as bad as that is financially, it still means that the music will survive, even if it is not appreciated properly. You know what I'm saying? So, do you think I should play one real quick?
Yeah. We'll have you play. Thanks for doing this, man.
Oh, my pleasure.
You know, and people can check you on your website. And,
yes. I'm on
your
Facebook.
Blog, right?
The blog is a little bit on hiatus, but there's plenty of content. If you go to my blog, which is Jazz Truth, there's still a lot of stuff to read if you haven't read it already. I worked pretty hard on that, but with my second kid, it was just hard to maintain. So
you having a young kid, it takes a lot, having children.
Yeah.